Good morning. I'm here to admit to you all that I am an NASA Shill. I was born a poor black boy. Oh, sorry, another movie that's old. Now, the honest to goodness, true facts. I was born in Roswell, New Mexico. Yes, right after the alien crash landing in Roswell. Um, I was born at the Air Force Hospital at the Roswell Air Force Base, where all the alien bodies were taken. And shortly after my birth, they started up Area 51. And that's all that I'm allowed to tell you. I, I grew up in very small town, New Mexico. Um, I wasn't given the advanced educations that other people were uh, given, magnet math and science schools and stuff. I went to public schools. Um, in my first grade, I I was doing third grade math. A few years later, I was reading the encyclopedia. Um, I moved to a very small town. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Um, in fact, the school I went to was elementary, middle school, high school all together. Um, one year they had 4 high school graduates. Um, so it was a very small town, New Mexico. Um, in high school, we moved a couple of times, and I went to a brand new high school that they wouldn't allow me to take advanced classes like pre-calculus or whatever. I just, because I was new and they didn't know much about me. So uh, my dad had me tested for IQ. It was very high. Of course, that's of little meaning. It depends on your education and what you stuff your brain with. Um, I graduated 12 out of 444, and that is without the advantage of the advanced classes. So let me step aside a little bit and talk about my home life. I was raised in a very conservative, fundamentalist Christian home. Uh, Church was the number one thing for us. Uh, However, I was never indoctrinated as far as science goes. Um, I don't recall ever being told that the earth was round or flat or square or whatever. Uh, in fact, I don't remember any sermons about the 4 pillars or the um, whatever. Uh, Let me also mention, while I'm talking about it, even in school, I don't remember them ever forcing us to believe that the earth was round. Um, I don't remember seeing a globe until I was in middle school, maybe. Um, they had one sitting over to the side, but the teacher never referenced it or pointed it out. It was not ever part of our science classes, but maybe history or geography, they might have pointed to Africa and said, "This is the continent of Africa." Um, I always, from the earliest time I can remember, wanted to be a scientist. I had science in my blood. Uh, I did model rockets when I was a kid. Uh, my favorite catalog to read was Edmunds' Scientific Catalog. Um, every time I had any money, I'd order something from there. Um, I always questioned everything. Um, I know flat earthers say we're just indoctrinated puppets and walking around with glassy eyes, uh, spouting what we've been indoctrinated with, and that's not true. Um, from as early as I can remember, Dad, why is there thunder? Why is the sky blue? Why does this happen? My favorite question that he just drove him crazy was, but why? He'd say, because I said so, and but why? But why? Um, so I questioned everything: church, God, my do's and don'ts, the world, everything I questioned. Um, when I lived out in the country, I spent long hours wandering around in the wilderness and looking at flowers and cactus and all kinds of stuff. As an adult, let me tell you, I was a licensed minister for my church, um, which, by the way, is the same denomination that J.M. Truth grew up in. Oh boy. Um, so the minister license lasted about a year, and I just couldn't give up science. I was worried about getting behind and not knowing what was going on. So I just uh, gave up the license. I went to college at New Mexico Tech. The reason I went there was because of finances. However, I found out once I got there that New Mexico Tech is a world-class university. They have like one of the top three research institutions in the country. Um, they had the highest percentage of undergraduates that went on to their PhD. Um, so it was a very good school. They taught a lot of science. You were required to take just the minimum of humanities and English, and were pretty much free to take as much science as you wanted. I started out as a geology student, but quickly found out, and guess what? Geology is hard. So I loved math so much. I was taking 2 to 3 math classes every semester. I pretty much took every math class that undergraduates were allowed to take. Um, In my opinion, math was a support science, and so I took as much other sciences as I could because I figured any job I would get would be supporting other scientists. Um, so I took things like physics, chemistry, um, geosciences. I also took every astrophysics class offered. Uh, I liked the astrophysics. It wasn't observational astronomy. We didn't go look at telescopes. All we did was study the mathematics, the physics of the universe, and boy, let me tell you, they have some nearly impossible mathematics. You should see some of the equations that they have to go through. Um, I graduated from college with high honors, and I went on to get my master's degree in experimental statistics from a different university. I started out working for an experimental statistics laboratory. Uh, they would take work from uh, other scientists and um, provide them with the statistical analysis they needed. Back then, you know, the only computers were the mainframes, and uh, the scientists didn't want to learn how to use those. Um, I had several jobs as an experimental statistical analyst. Uh, in particular, you guys, I worked for a NASA contractor at a facility in New Mexico. Um, no, I did not work directly for NASA, and I'll cover that in a few minutes. Uh, but I did work at a NASA facility. My paycheck was paid by NASA, um, and I was working on NASA projects for NASA scientists, PhD researchers. Um, so things that I learned while working for NASA. The first thing is that NASA doesn't do anything classified. Nothing is top secret or in any way classified. If you wanted to come to the facility where I worked, you could do that. However, things were very sensitive. You couldn't just wander around, and it wasn't because it was secret, it was because they were doing explosives testing, fuel testing, uh, hazardous chemicals, uh, and they just didn't want you to get blown up or something, you know. Uh, in fact, even Jeranism did a Freedom of Information Act request to NASA and got his information that he wanted. Uh, Let me tell you this quote, and it is my experience as well, but this guy put it in such good words. He says, I am an avid periodical reader, and one treat I got at my first TV job, where we had a satellite Earth station, was a subscription to NASA Tech Briefs. It turns out that built in to NASA's charter is the stipulation that they give away all the technology developed in-house to the public. This was done by publishing a large magazine that had synopsis of learned papers that the reader could request by mail uh, Today, it's mostly web-based, but the onus holds true, and that was the way it was where I was at. Uh, every paper that was published was put in like a magazine rack, and people were allowed to take those if they wanted them. You could send them to anybody. There just was no uh, classified testing going on. Uh, my very first assignment, and this is kind of critical, I wanted to tell you about. I did a motion analysis using a very powerful computer with motion analysis software to analyze a high definition video of the Challenger explosion. Um, I was supposed to track every piece that you could see uh, in the explosion, every piece as it tracked over across the sky. Um, in particular, it's kind of tough, but in particular, I saw a helmet with a head in it. Let me tell you for sure, those astronauts were killed in that explosion. Uh, it was traumatic for me. Um, I had nightmares for months after seeing that. I guarantee you that those astronauts were killed. And anybody that tells you so and so is living in wherever, and it's just not true. And if you research it critically and with an open mind, you can definitely tell that those are not the astronauts. Um, at this facility, we did all sorts of testing that I just found fascinating. Materials testing, um, burn testing, any item that went onto the space station or the shuttle was tested for burning. Um, if Apple iPad was going up there, first they had to burn one. Um, you have to realize that the astronauts up there are in an enclosed environment with an enclosed recycled air. Um, so if something off gases a toxic chemical, that's critical. So we had to test all of that. Odor testing, again, they had a closed atmosphere. Uh, you'd be surprised at things that you'd never think of, like opening a Band-Aid. A Band-Aid gives off an odor. Once it's in the atmosphere there, it's in there for good. Um, rocket engine testing. I got to watch them test some rocket engines. These were not the main thrusters. Uh, those are way too big for where we were. But we did test the IAPUs, the rockets that they use to change direction. Um, we tested fuel, LOX, GOX, hydrazine, uh, hydrogen peroxide. We did hypervelocity testing. Our facility was the first hypervelocity installation in the United States. And this is where they test very, very high speed particles. What happens if they hit metals or different things. And again, you'd be surprised at, something going as fast as meteorites go. meteors, tiny particles. Um, and yes, they do hit the space station all the time. This is not a new thing. Uh, the space shuttle, I remember one time they said that the space shuttle landed and there was a particle that had gone within like a quarter of an inch through one of the windows in the space shuttle. So yes, it's a very real thing, happens. So don't let anybody tell you it's fake and never happens. Uh, so we did all kinds of serious, real testing, pressure vessels. I'm reminded of that every time I see people talking about gas pressure in an enclosed environment, blah, blah, blah. So this place was like heaven for a geeky scientist like me. I used to go to work and think I felt guilty because I got to go out there and play all day and they paid me for it. So it was fun. So let me tell you right off the bat before we go further, I have an earned right to be called a scientist. It has nothing to do with wearing a white lab coat. I never do that. Uh, and like an old political quote I heard, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. Uh, Other things that I learned about NASA through the years, not just by working there, but um, I watched the first moon landing intently on TV, very close. I can tell you that the video feed was not the same as television, movies, or whatever. They didn't have movies back then. Uh, but there was a clear difference. It was obvious that these guys were really on the moon. I have no doubt that it was a real thing. In the late 70s, early 80s, after all the moon landings were finished, uh, Congress determined that uh, the interest in the moon was waning, and they cut NASA's budget from 4% of the federal budget to 0.4%. Uh, Now, just think for a minute of yourself. How would you like a 90% cut in pay? So, in the early 80s, NASA gave a statement that they would give up manned spaceflight uh, and replace that with robotic spaceflight. Um, the surveyors or whatever that go around Jupiter or go out to Pluto, the new one that goes to the sun. Uh, those just couldn't be possible with manned spaceflight. And the rovers that land on the moon or the Mars, uh, or even when they land on a comet, an asteroid, none of that could have been done with human spaceflight. And so NASA was spending money on those kinds of activities rather than trying to make every flight uh, safe for humans. Think about the cost of the testing and the materials and the space required. Um, so it was a conscious decision made. It wasn't like they just decided they were spending money on the wrong things. Uh, In the 80s, another thing that happened with NASA, they were mandated by Congress that NASA employees could not do the actual work, testing, building rockets, um, whatever. That work had to be done by contractors. NASA money had to be spread out among private contractors such as Boeing or Raytheon, so forth. Um, so um, I'm reading my notes here, so give me a second to find where I'm at. Um, so why flat Earth? Why did I get into that? Well, currently I work as a database administrator. Uh, I'm completely out of the science portion of my background, and this job is very routine, very rote. Uh, so I feel like sometimes mentally I'm stagnating. So I started searching the internet for something that would stimulate my brain. I'm getting close to retirement, and I wanted something that I could spend some time on after I retire and keep myself aware and uh, sharp. So that's why I started looking, and I stumbled into uh, flat Earth videos, debunking videos. I think the first one I did was Professor Stick. I followed him for a while. Um, and I commented a lot on flat Earth videos. I found out quickly that nobody wants to learn the truth. Nobody wants to have me tell them uh, it's not that way. You get hateful comments. You just can't believe the kinds of uh, hate and comments that you get from flat Earth people. They accuse globe Earth people of doing that, and believe me, flat Earthers are many times far and away worse. Um, so after commenting and commenting with no results, I decided to make my own videos to try and prove a lot of the things that flat earthers were posited wasn't true. And uh, so I'm currently doing that, and you're seeing one of those. Um, from my entire adult life, I guess, to me, every single piece of information has to fit with every other single piece of information. Uh, I don't know if you remember the old 7 phases of Kevin Bacon. It's kind of like that. Every piece of information fits together with every other piece of information like a puzzle. It has to. And so you can't just say, oh, the earth is flat, live with it. Uh, it doesn't fit into the puzzle. You have to take out a bunch of pieces to get it to fit, and then you can't get the other pieces to fit anywhere. I can promise you that. Um, there are so many things that don't work on flat Earth. period. Um, and I made many videos about different things if you want to look at those. Uh, there are plenty of other channels that are making similar videos, and I just would encourage you to try to understand that there are so many things that do not fit flat Earth. And just for a short list here: winds, the jet stream, currents in the ocean, storms, hurricanes and tornadoes, land area. Um, I did a surprising video about area, uh, travel, eclipses, seasons, time zones, that kind of thing, and on and on and on. You can't put one piece into your puzzle without uh, making sure that every other piece fits. So don't tell me that your flat earth model works, because unless you can answer all these other things, then it doesn't work. And you, you cannot, you should not, any scientist knows, you can't throw out what works just because you think it shouldn't work, even though it does, um, unless you have a better solution to replace it with. And so far, we haven't seen anything close to working from flat earthers. Uh, so, one last beef that I want to tell you about flat earthers that just bugs the heck out of me is that they seem to be really good at skipping over the introductory type things and going straight for the most advanced uh, theoretical physics, whatever, that they can find. A good example, and I've seen this in tons of examples, but the worst example is that uh, most flat earthers will say scientists don't know what gravity is, they don't believe in gravity, whatever. Um, and what they're doing is they're skipping over the fact that on Earth, in the solar system, the rotation of the planets and the sun and moons and whatever, all those things fit gravity perfectly. And they go right straight for the most advanced uh, theory of relativity, uh, advanced theoretical physics. So, in the past, few years, maybe 50 years, uh, scientists have been studying the space-time continuum, and they seriously want to reconcile the four fundamental forces, which you can look up. One of those being gravity, uh, and they have a hard time understanding what exactly causes gravity, where does it come from, uh, and it just doesn't. Those things do not matter for day-to-day living, day-to-day gravity. Um, so, uh, these scientists are working on this highly theoretical thing, but in your day-to-day life, there is still gravitational effects. They still affect daily living. Uh, they still affect the solar system, uh, and you must be able to answer why those things work if you're going to call them, uh, say that gravity doesn't exist. Uh, So this is my confessions as a NASA shill. Um, now you guys know pretty much everything about me. Um, I hope that you'll continue to watch videos that I make. Maybe you'll invite other people. If there's information, if there are things you'd like to see, um, put those in the comments below. I would appreciate that. And you already know that I read every comment and I comment back. So um, thanks for listening. Uh, Let me give you a little heads up. In the near future here, I'm going to do an experiment proving that gravity works. So you might keep your eyes open for that one. And again, leave me some comments. Thanks. See if I can